Good afternoon. Deputy President Paul Mashatile says that South Africa has inherited a labour force that's characterised by racial and gender inequality as well as skills shortages. He was speaking during the 28th National Economic Development and Labour Council, Nedlac, at the annual summit held in Midrand today. Mashatile says unemployment is rife, particularly among Africans, and says through collective effort, government, labour and business can influence the direction of the country. Mashatile has given a thumbs up to the recent commitment by some CEOs to work with government to try and reconstruct the ailing economy. And he's acknowledged a slight improvement in the unemployment rate, which has declined to 32.6% in the second quarter of the year. But Mashatile raised concerns about job losses in some sectors of the economy.
The best that can be said here is that the trend is heading in the right direction, albeit at a slow pace. Serious concerns at the job losses, particularly in sectors like manufacturing, persists. In this regard, organized labor, business and government, and the community sector at Nedlac have turned to each other to seek ways of turning our economy around, reversing unemployment and building inclusive growth.
SABC News economics reporter Katleho Lehori is at the Nedlac Summit and joins us live. Very good afternoon to Katleho. Just take us through what else has happened there.
A very good afternoon to you, Nzinga, and to our viewers at home. Just a marathon of engagements, one after the other, in terms of the four social partners that are here forming part of this 28th Nedlac Summit. So we saw government just giving feedback in terms of where we are right now on those socio-economic challenges. Business as well, just taking part through Kes Kovedia from Business Unity South Africa, just talking about how there's still a long way to go in terms of these social partners finding each other and getting the best out of the collaboration and the work that continues through Nedlac. We saw Labour as well saying that really there's a need to ensure that you champion the needs of workers. Most of them just talking about how some of these partners tend to agree on commitments here, but when you see on the ground the tangible results are not there. They want just commitments, fresh commitments from each and every one of these social partners to ensure that there's a mitigation in terms of the socio-economic challenges that exist on the ground. The Deputy President there, Paul Mashatile, giving us a keynote address and just talking about little progress that has been made here, but also acknowledging that there's still a long way to go in implementing the social compact that most of these men and women gathered here have agreed upon over time. Also, just looking at the fact that there's been slow growth in the economy and just the unemployment crisis that exists one sector to another. I'm going to bring into the conversation now government, this being the Minister of Employment and Labour, Minister Thulas Nxesi, who delivered an opening address here, just talking about really how important this institution is and how these social partners should get out of this meeting here and this summit here with a consensus in terms of a strategy on where to go in mitigating against these challenges. Minister, thank you very much for joining us on the SABC. Just reflect with us, where are we within the Nedlac and some of those commitments where policies then have also been championed, but we're still seeing those socio-economic challenges that persist unabated?
Listening to all the inputs made from the Deputy President to the social partners and even the report of the ED, Lisa Saftel, it's very clear that Nedlac has a very important dialogue platform for all the stakeholders. They've been able to navigate very complex, critical issues which are facing our society, which also go beyond the workplace. I mean, if you look at the issues of the energy crisis, future energy planning, you look at the issues of food security, employment creation, and a number of issues which we've talked about. It's very clear that on all those issues, they remain very critical, and they've made a number of good proposals which have been considered by government. But you must remember, you're talking about different stakeholders with different starting points or differing interests, and those have to be mediated. But if you look at the interventions they've made in the labor market situation, I mean, let's take one issue. Faced with the biggest pandemic, one of the issues which faced us was the issue of closing the whole economy. And a lot of people lost their jobs. It was out of those discussions and the sacrifices which were made by the workers that they had to release 64 billion through the department, which was some form of solidarity to be able to give some relief to a number of workers. All I can say, yes, there have been successes, but also we must also do a self-reflection in terms of some of the weaknesses, which I think everybody has acknowledged, that sometimes it takes very long to be able to reach the agreements. Sometimes we are not able to reach agreements on some of the issues, like issue of a social compacting, but we cannot say we've not done enough. We must be able to say, on social compacting, we've said, if it's difficult to do it in the whatever forum, we must be able to accept that we can be able to be successful when we have the bilateral forums, trilateral forums, multilateral forums, and so on. And that's what we're doing now. A lot of issues, we are able to deal with them through such forums.
Let's particularly talk about that social compact. We know very well that there was even a commitment coming from President Cyril Ramaphosa to ensure that that social compact becomes a reality. It finds meaning on the ground. But there are gaps. People still don't have jobs. We know very well that poverty is rife as we speak right now. Most people even talking about how there's a need to ensure that you put young people first, where opportunities are concerned. The economy, for instance, has not been doing well for quite some time, and some of the issues coming out of this Nedlac Summit is the fact that those policies are there, but there hasn't been a move to implement. Why are we finding ourselves here?
But remember, when the president launched this big program of the economic reconstruction and recovery plan, a number of issues which were mentioned, like the massive infrastructure, the issue of dealing with the energy crisis and so on. And all these areas, and the energy crisis in particular, impacted on the socio-economic lives of everybody, disrupted the economy and so on. And the president was very clear. Before you have the economy growing, we needed to have the investment. That's why he has been on an investment drive. But as the investment is trickling in, the economy will grow, and then we'll be able to create jobs. It's not going to be an event. It's going to be a process. Remember, prior to the COVID, our economy was going down and we had lost a number of jobs. Came COVID, we lost more than 1 million jobs. And then there was also those riots, which also destroyed some of the workplaces. So it is going to be a process. And one of the issues which the president emphasizes in terms of this economic recovery and reconstruction period has been the issue of youth unemployment. And as part of that, there have been a number of programs, including the presidential youth stimulus, in order to grow what you call the jobs for the young people. There have been a number of intervention in terms of skills by the different departments. And he has been able to say, departments, whether it's short-term programs or long-term programs, they can't work in silos. They need to integrate. You will find that through our labor activation programs, we are working with the small businesses, we're working with higher education, we're working with agriculture and so on. We're working with the digitization, which is under the digital department. We are working with the electricity department about how do you train the youth in all those areas in order to be able to be employed or even have their own enterprises. But it is a process. We know that it's urgent. But that particular process is going to take some time, and it will be able to bear fruits after some time. So let's be patient, but let's bring hope in terms of what we're doing currently. In terms of those programs, we need to take those programs down to our people and make them understand where we are coming from, what we are doing. As long as they do not know what we are doing, they will continue to criticize us that we're not doing enough.
You raised issue with the labour space to say that there's been slow pace in transformation where the labour market is concerned. We've heard from unions and federations that are here. They're talking about how then you would see decisions taken here, but then on the ground you would see, for instance, what they call the unilateral implementation of the wage increase last year, and they're looking to ensure that what is agreed upon here has teeth, and also Nedlac can hold social partners accountable, those that renege on some of these agreements. Talk about the labour space.
I think there's one thing which we have to accept. We can dialogue. If there is no agreement, at some stage somebody has to take a decision. The government does take decisions when there is no consensus, because we can't wait for consensus until we are behind time. There's urgency in what we're doing.
Defeat the purpose of
there's urgency. It's not defeating that. It says we'll be able to listen to the views of the different stakeholders. And then if there's no consensus, we will have to mediate that and take a decision, which unfortunately, it won't be 100% for this stakeholder or that stakeholder, but it will take all the views of the different stakeholders. But you're making reference to the previous wage settlement. Fortunately, at that time, I was acting Minister of Public Service and Administration. I think there was a dialogue on this particular matter. It landed even in court, and the court ruled in favor of whoever. It was in favor of government. But besides that, government tried by all means to reach consensus, and government was able to give some little, but the reality is you can be able to implement whatever you implement within the resources which you are having. There's an issue of affordability. It's a very serious matter. And what we're trying to do, you have to do whatever we do within the limited resources which we're facing. And I think everybody is talking about, all the economists are talking about the struggling economy which is not growing enough to be able to meet all its needs. So even when we go into the bargaining, we have to take into consideration all those concerns. But it doesn't mean that we should not give the workers and recognize that the food prices and that crisis, everything is growing and or is increasing. Therefore, we have to take that into consideration. But unfortunately, we are also working within what we would call limited or scarce resources.
Minister Nxesi, thank you very much, sir, for your time. Is coming through as the Employment and Labour Minister, just taking us through really what government's role is here and some of the concerns that have been raised here over time. But Nzinga, most of the social partners here are wanting Nedlac to have teeth in terms of ensuring that there's greater accountability to those that renege on the agreements that are taken here, and also just talking about compromise going forward, to say that as the parties, we need to find each other in terms of making sure that there's compromise for the greater good in mitigating against the socio-economic challenges. But also what we saw happen in the first part was Nedlac reporting back, and they received an unqualified audit, and they're saying that this is encouraging in also just some of the discussions that would work in strengthening this institution. Nzinga, back to you in studio.
Katle, thank you so much for giving us that update from Nedlac. He will be staying there and continuing to keep us updated in the afternoon.